Are you ready for reentry? As part of our conversations on mental health, I have my favorite licensed clinical social worker, Amy Farmer, with us today to talk about reentry, what we're going through, how we move forward, how we move out of our COVID year and into what we have looking forward. So thank you so much, Amy, for being with me today.
Thank you for having me.
So Amy, we're doing Mental Health Awareness Month, as I said. So we're talking about different coping skills, and you and I spoke earlier at the beginning of the pandemic, or sort of early days, about different coping skills and how the pandemic was affecting different people. Yep. And now that we're coming out of it, it's got a whole nother pile of affects and issues associated with it. And I wondered if you could touch on some of those.
There are so many, but I will touch on them and interrupt with questions or thoughts. I think that, even going through the pandemic, we all went through phases in terms of our mental health. Many people experience this kind of concept of, it's a crisis, I got this, we're going to rally the troops together and we're going to figure this out. And then that lulled into a stagnation. A lot of folks dealt with some depressive symptoms, some anxiety, because it didn't seem to be ending. And during that point in time, almost every realm of our life changed. How we spent our money, what our daily schedule was, how we ate, what we wore, who we interacted with, how we spent free time, what our work life looked like. And over the course of a year, we've now normalized all of those changes, the new norm we constantly keep hearing. And so we've settled into that, some more happily than others. And now for most people, we have to readjust. And I think my biggest concern is there is this media and talk about it's great, the pandemic is hopefully ending, it's a time for celebration. That absolutely is true. People are staying healthier, people aren't dying, the economy can improve, all of these wonderful things. But a lot of people are struggling with a lot of anxiety, still having to restructure their lives. And those folks that are struggling with this kind of reopening really don't want to talk about it, because we're told we should all be celebrating. And that's created kind of its new range of mental health issues, as well as the reality that this whole year was a traumatic scenario. And we often hear post-traumatic stress disorder. You hear it connected mostly to war or some other kind of crisis scenario. And that doesn't always show its symptoms right away. So sometimes there's a period where, again, we're re-energized. This is new. We're opening up. We're going to have kind of that rallying, energetic feeling for many people. But a month from now, things may not feel so good. And people need to be aware that that's normal. That's completely to be expected. So you're going to see all sorts of different responses to this.
What are some of the things that people can look out for like PTSD and even because people think of PTSD in grand scales
Yes.
of war and things like that, but it can be very subtle and can be very nuanced and still have very significant impacts on your mental health.
Absolutely. And it can either create kind of this overriding sense of anxiety, unease that just covers an entirety of a day, a month. But it also can be very specific. It can be when I pass this doctor's office, or when I pass, when I get my mail because something negative came in the mail. So I think it's really taking a breath and really analyzing how was my life impacted by the pandemic? What are the areas that caused me the greatest concern? And looking out for similar scenarios that are going to happen. So again, simple mail, something negative came in the mail, you got a notification about something, a bill collector. So know that getting the mail for a while may make you feel uncomfortable, and understand why there's that feeling. Because when we start to feel uncomfortable, and the classic symptoms are going to be, depending on where we hold our stress, Our stomach may kind of get the butterflies. A lot of people will describe it as a pit in the stomach.
Mm-hmm.
I may tighten muscles. I may feel flushed. My heart might race a little bit more. Recognize those symptoms as, okay, this is an anxiety symptom. Can I identify what's causing it? Some that are more global. If overall I've been stressed for a year because of the number of things that happened or losses I unfortunately experienced, you're going to see changes in sleep pattern, changes in eating habits. All of those are indicators that my stress level has reached a level where I really need to get some intervention. A lot I can choose to do on my own, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those coping mechanisms, but all of those classic anxiety symptoms, as well as the concept of I don't want to get out of bed. I don't want to get dressed. I don't want to talk to anybody. Anxiety and depression, people often talk about, and they are truly separate disorders and difficulties, but in reality, they're sisters. One can very much lead to the other. If I am feeling depressed and not motivated for a long period of time, that in and of itself is going to cause anxiety because I'm not getting things done. And if I'm anxious a lot of the time, our body just gets exhausted because you can only have your blood pressure, your heart at a certain rate for so long. It causes almost its own sort of internal collapse. Yeah. So if you have one, chances are you have the other. And so you have to figure out which is the lead emotion and address that. But you'll tend to see both together, but people like to think of them as completely separate, and they rarely are.
Well, the ground floor thing that people can do before intervention is, like my mom always says, move a muscle, change thought, you know.
And my grandmother used to always say, you know, take a shower and get dressed and go outside. Like if you've got the blues, that's what you should do. And when we look at, I would urge people to do some research on, there's something called Maslow's hierarchy. And it is in the social sciences, it looks at human needs in terms of what steps, what levels do we need to reach to be able to get to a point, what they call self-actualization. And that's where we're really just functioning, performing, learning, all at our best. But there are foundational steps that if they're not in place, I can't reach there. And that first step is physiological needs. And so am I getting the right foods? Am I getting am I taking deep breaths? Am I getting oxygen?
You're hydrated.
Exactly. Am I getting, does my body have what it needs? Because if your body does not have what it needs, nothing else is going to happen. Your brain is in fight or flight. Mm-hmm. And as much as, we've all heard, take a deep breath. Yeah. That is huge. When we get incredibly anxious, because our body goes into fight or flight, the bottom portion of your lungs will actually close off. And you won't get as much oxygen to your bloodstream and your brain. So you're not thinking very clearly. Mm. And that's, our body is conserving all of the energy for your vital organs because it's in fight or flight. Yeah. So, I tell folks, if you're really struggling with some anxiety, set some sort of chime or something on your phone, top of every hour, 5 deep breaths. Because you want to make it so autonomically you're doing deep breaths. A lot of people who struggle with anxiety hold their breath. You don't even realize it because you can function that way. No. So I
can go all day and all of a sudden realize my shoulders have been up here and be like, oh,
exactly. Exactly. And so those are those. So if I can take some deep breaths, if I can loosen my muscles, then my brain is going to go, oh, there's no crisis. We have everything we need. And I can start to then do some problem solving and some planning for some of those more real life difficulties.
Yeah, we have a breathing exercise in the beginning of the Bikram class where you're moving, you're breathing in and out deeply, and you're also moving your arms and your head together. And that movement I think is great too. I love it if I'm feeling stressed to just drop the shoulders away from the ears a little bit, and it works the breath as well and really gives you a bit of a jolt of energy, which is great.
And it probably opens up all of those muscles that go across your sternum, opens up your lungs and allows for that deep breath to happen. Mm-hmm. So that is, the first ground level thing that everybody needs to do. You need to get the right nutrients to your brain. You need to get the oxygen. You want to get that adrenaline. There is a lot of confidence in being strong physically, So even if I go out for a long walk, yes, I've created some endorphins, but I'm using my body. And if I'm in control of my body, then I'm in control of a whole bunch of stuff. And that translates to an emotional confidence, which can help us, again, kind of overcome some of these negative emotions that we might be struggling with.
Because we're capable of so much more than we realize, but you just have to recognize that you have that.
Yep.
You know, but also make good choices, you know, with everything, some of the difficulties that are going on in the world today. I find that when I'm consuming some of the news and getting some of the information so I can stay up to date, I really have to be careful because it's so traumatic. Yep. And part of me feels guilty because I'm like, well, what those people are going through is, you know, huge. Why can't I just tolerate consuming it or learning about it, you know? But it has a really big impact, and it will drag you down.
And I think that's really important, because just like what we eat impacts our body and our energy, the information we absorb is also going to impact our thought process, our sleep, whether we view something as a crisis or not a crisis. But the difference is, and I understand your point of, I should be able to hear this and feel empathy and all of those pieces. The difference is the folks that are unfortunately living through it, they have things they can control. So just like all of us felt at the beginning of the pandemic, this kind of energized almost, folks in the midst of a crisis have that experience. We are getting vicarious trauma, which is completely helpless. You know, if there are small things you can do, if you can donate, bring something to a food pantry. I mean, they're so you can do those small pieces, but that's why it's almost harder to watch it than to be in it.
Oh, so true. It's so true. One of the other things I'm noticing as we move through and into this new phase of the pandemic and our socializing with each other and stuff is there's a lot of, everybody's at a different place of comfort level. And some people are ready to be like, yeah, everything's great. Like I was in IKEA today and I was really having a difficult time because there was a woman standing behind me who was not standing, you know, with the line, you know, the lines were on the floor, the 6 feet. She was right on my back the whole time. And I didn't want to be like constantly giving her side eye or something like that. Like I thought, Robin, if you want her to back off, just turn around and say, would you be so kind as to, you know, step back a little bit, you know, but I didn't want to offend her, you know? So I was really stuck because I was feeling really offended and encroached upon. And even when I got up to pay, she wasn't even buying anything. She was with a friend. And so she, while I was paying, walked by and stood right by where I was packing up my stuff. And I wanted to be like I started to feel myself getting angry. Yeah. Robin, you either address it and say something polite or let it go. You've got a choice here. But it was funny. It was how it all played out in my head. I was very uncomfortable and I couldn't quite figure out how to address it.
And that's a really important point, because this is a new scenario. And we're not getting clear messages about what our expectations of behavior or social norms, whatever we want to call them, where we all know we stop at a red light. Yeah. Well, we all don't necessarily have the same view of whether we wear a mask or not, whether we keep 6 feet apart or not. And the state is telling us one thing, stores are telling us a different thing. So a lot of that conflict comes from the fact that there aren't consistent social norms. Yeah. And you're very right in terms of what we control is what we say and what we do. And we tend to focus on what we can't control. I can't control whether this woman backs up. No, but I can control if I move out of her space. I can control if I say something. But we tend to look at that flip side of the coin, partly due to being polite, not knowing what the right thing to do is, and all that sort of stuff. And I think it's even harder now because we've lost a lot of the practice of social interactions. Yeah. Where something we could have done fluidly potentially a year ago, I haven't had to practice. I haven't really had to interact with anybody for a long piece of time. So some people are very comfortable with those sorts of conversations, but those who had difficulty in the past, it's going to be increasingly difficult because of the messaging and the lack of practice overall. And there are folks that, you know, as we kind of said at the beginning, there is this stereotype that this is a time of celebration for everybody. Folks who, there's a group of folks who really did thrive during this time. And folks who have more of an introverted nature, who may have historically struggled with social interactions, or who may have sensory processing issues, who get auditorily overwhelmed or visually overwhelmed. This to them was a reprieve. It was a wonderful time to really kind of just sit back and just be in the moment and experience the world without those external pressures. And obviously we all need socialization. We're social creatures, but some of those folks are really going to do some significant struggling in coming back out, because those are skills that they had to work to hone initially. Now they haven't had to use them. And so coming back out may be even more difficult, especially those who are truly going to have some sensory processing, you know, the noises of a store, the noises of being in a loud, busy place. We normalize everything and our body finds that baseline. So if I live in silence for a long time, any noise is going to be very alarming to me. And so same thing with having to socialize and manage some of those nuances of social interaction. And I know a lot of people are, if they can, choosing to continue to work remotely. That's great if that's convenient for your lifestyle, but avoidance isn't a great thing. Going back to Maslow's hierarchy of need, those physiological needs are first. Then there comes this safety. Do I have a roof over my head? Do I have enough money to meet basic needs? Am I living in a place where physically I'm safe? After that is this sense of belonging. And needing to be connected to other human beings. And like everything else, there's a spectrum. Some people really thrive with constant social activity. Other people just need to know that I have one or two close folks, you know, around me. So completely isolating is never a healthy choice. Yeah. But how do we kind of relearn those skills? And I think there are two main things. Anytime there's a new skill, whatever realm we're talking about, first having that positive visualization always helps. If I'm going into a scenario and I know how I want it to go, visualizing it, role playing it in my head, those are great things to do. You know, we are more likely to have the outcome that we envisioned if we truly have that vision and we go in with that energy. And giving yourself grace, small bite size. If I haven't had a lot of noise, if I'm not necessarily comfortable in social scenarios, start really small. Maybe I'm just gonna, you know, go get a cup of coffee at a coffee shop for half an hour, go to the store, go to a very small venue, see one friend for an hour. Truly pace yourself. It doesn't need to be, I'm gonna jump in 2 feet. And for those folks that do really thrive in social interaction, I would urge that they think about moderation, because they also, as much as they want more social interaction, they've also had a quieter, slower lifestyle. So they can still become overstimulated or forget moderation in a number of realms that are important for our healthy being.
It was interesting when you listed out all the different ways that we did things differently over the past year. And I hadn't thought about them in a big list. And it's really striking when you think about every aspect of everything we do and how it was impacted. Now there's some people, like you said, somebody who was naturally introverted anyway, and maybe was a landscaper or something like that. Yep. Their work wasn't necessarily heavily impacted. Some people I'm sure feel like, well, it wasn't, you know, other than wearing a mask to the grocery store and stuff like that, it didn't really have that big of an impact. But yep. So there's a real range of how people were impacted and yep. And I think still a range of navigating all the different aspects of how we come out of this, you know. Yes. And I'm getting, you know, I've had an interesting experience as a business owner, having to really decide, because of a little bit of a lack of direction at sometimes there was clear direction from the government and sometimes there wasn't, but I had to really make up my mind and decide what I was comfortable with. Yeah. And then hold to that, you know, and I have people pressing me that they want the masks off, and I have people pressing me that they're still not comfortable coming in, you know. Yeah. So I get it from both sides, you know. Yeah. So but I've kind of in a weird way enjoyed being put in a position where I have to just decide what I'm comfortable with, and that's going to be it.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah. And I think that's, I think a couple of things. One, we should all respect each other's process.
Yeah.
We all had a different experience. We all struggled in different ways, and everybody's process is completely valid. And then when you talk about there's a comfort in just kind of saying, I have to decide what I'm comfortable with. I think when it comes to any decision in life, a good rule of thumb is to know what your own personal belief system is. Mm. And if you always come back to your belief system, you're in an okay place. So whether we're talking about money, relationships, eating habits, whatever that may be, and I think it's a good rule of thumb, if I'm in a scenario and I have any indicator of physical discomfort, I will get it in my belly. It's a great time to take a breath and go, are my actions matching my belief system? Mm. And we often forget to go back to that belief system because that's our guiding compass. And we have belief systems about everything. We don't think about it constantly, but left alone in a scenario, I'm going to make a certain decision that's based on my belief system. And so starting to take stock.
Well, there's lots of contradictory, like I have a business, so I need, and I'm struggling. So I need to get people in the door, but I'm not willing to put the community at risk to do that. And so some people think I'm being too conservative, and probably some people maybe think I'm not being conservative enough. I don't think so, but for the most part, you know, but it was kind of empowering to go, okay, this is where I'm going to come down on this. And this is what I feel comfortable with. And this is how I can be consequent to my responsibility to keep the community safe, my community safe. And, you know.
And coming back to whatever that thought process is incredibly important. And we do often let it go. And I let people know that if you're going to go through a process of identifying your belief systems, and we do it a lot, especially at different phases of life, you know, someone coming right out of school and starting to move out or entering a new relationship, you've got a lot of negotiation to do with yourself. And a belief system should always be one sentence. Because a lot of people will say, well, I believe this in this situation, then it's not a belief system. Yeah. If I believe something, it follows me across all scenarios, and my actions and my words should match that. If that happens, I have peace. Not easy to do. We have a lot of external pressures.
Well, and your belief system can be challenged often, you know,
very much
and
so.
you have to come up with decisions on things that you never had to contemplate before.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
I never thought I would be in this position, you know, and so it's like, oh, okay, let me think on the fly and figure out what I'm, you know, how am I going to make this choice, and how am I?
Yeah. It's one of the places that in folks I'm working with, especially young women, but across the board, is how some of the beliefs about how we dress, how we look, physical presentation, there's a lot of challenges going on with that. And some people are truly embracing it. We wore a mask and continue to wear a mask. So what we looked like was hidden fairly.
Yeah. It was
So, you know, if you did makeup, you did your eyes, and that was many of us working from home, you started to work in sweatpants or sweatshirts, and people started to realize I can be just as productive in this outfit. Or, you know, I felt more comfortable not, you know, dressing in a certain way, or not.
I don't have to wear the power suit.
Yep. I have a lot of women who stopped dyeing their hair. Initially because you couldn't go to a hairdresser, and then because, hey,
I think it already grew out. So
color.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so that's an interesting piece of negotiation for folks. You know, if we're going back into the office, has dress code changed? Or if I've embraced my silver hair, do I need to change that because now I'm going out into society, but I was comfortable with it when I was alone? So that's an interesting place that I think we're seeing a lot of those belief systems really challenged and seeing some significant changes.
So what are some good tips to sort of leave space for people?
Tell me what you mean by leave space.
Well, because I think one of the things for us to get out of this divisiveness that we've gotten into as a society is we've got to be willing to leave space for people and recognize that, like, they might not agree. You might disagree with somebody, but you can still leave space for them. And even if, some people get really angry, like I've seen people that get really angry at people that don't do what they think they should do. And they feel like it's a personal threat. And I don't know, I'm just trying to find that empathy or that compassion or just that space where you go, all right, I really, really disagree with you, but I'm gonna, I'm not going to lump you in as a horrible person or, or belittle you or whatever for your opinions.
And I think that is probably one of the hardest things for us as human beings to do.
It's very hard.
And I think there's a couple different ways to come at it. We often determine the success of an interaction based on if I was able to get you to see my point, or I was able to get you to do something. Mm-hmm. If we can always come back to ourselves, just like coming back to our belief systems, if I am pleased with how I behaved and what I said, that interaction was a win. I can only control myself. Mm-hmm. Hard to do if something someone is saying really pushes against my belief system, or I feel is harmful to someone I love, or harmful to something around me. And then I think, again, if we are role modeling behavior that we're pleased with, that is putting energy out there. That is putting some positivity into a potentially negative situation. And we can't control others, but the energy we put out there may cause others to respond slightly differently. We know, putting gasoline on a fire is just going to make it worse. Mm-hmm. So if I'm not adding negativity to a situation that's fairly volatile, I've already made it a little better. And then if we can get to the point that, no, we have our belief systems, whatever they may be, based on a lifetime. So we all had influences, whether they be familial, whether they be from friends, whether they be from school. So we've had all of these influences. The people we're talking to have also had a range of influences that have caused them to make the decisions they're making. Mm-hmm. And so respecting that they've had their experiences, I don't know what they are, but it is not for me to judge, because people do have belief systems often for a survival reason, or because this belief system allowed me to continue to have this sense of belonging to this group. Doesn't mean that we can't hope people are open-minded, but we can have empathy for this life is hard. And if people have reached an age that they've managed to get through school, they're someone's child, they have relationships, they might have children, they have held down a job, all of that deserves respect. And so recognizing that they've had their path to walk and they have their accomplishments that should be respected. So we have a different in belief. And if my behavior really kind of epitomizes my belief system, that's really the best I can do.
Yeah, because we've been, with social media, we got very able to spout whatever we thought we wanted to without that repercussion. And then with this time that we've kind of been apart and in our own worlds, it's been easier to do that. And now as we come back together and start interacting more with not just the people in your life, but just the people around you. Like I said, my experience in the store of being like, okay, how do I resolve this conflict, mm-hmm. and how do I do it respectfully, but still, maintaining this is important to me. And it feels like it's an important point that I need to make. So how do I do that? So I think as we come back together, just recognizing that, and I think naturally it happens with face-to-face interaction, people are less likely to be as spiteful or, quick or short in their commentary there, because when they have to face somebody, it's a different story. But I might have made if I didn't have to stand right next to that woman, I might have been making a sarcastic comment if something was online, but because she was right there, I was more aware of, okay, how do I resolve this?
And that, we've had, unfortunately, some images that we've had from media. And so we may see an increase in that, as people deal with their stressors of this time opening up a little bit. We know that we've had some examples from some very powerful people that really glamorize conflict, inappropriate language, all those sorts of things. So absolutely, can that continue? but coming back to ourselves again.
Well, I want to revisit, you said it a couple of times, but I think it's definitely worth repeating even a third time, is what we have control over.
Yeah.
It's so important to remember that you have control over your actions. And if you want to have control over somebody else's actions, the only way you're going to be able to do that is by your own actions.
Yep. And then you've created a different influence. We still don't control their actions, but I've created a different influence. They may or may not alter their behavior based on my influence. And taking that concept of we can only control ourselves, if we go back to the folks that may be really struggling through the pandemic time and through the opening up time, where, really struggling with some depressive symptoms, some lack of motivation, that same thing of what can I control can be very useful in those moments. Many times when I talk to somebody, they're like, I just can't get out of bed. I can't get out of bed. I can't go to work. And most of us know what that feeling is like. And so we try to take it down to bite size. We don't need to worry about going to work right now. Can you put your legs over the side of the bed? Can you take the 20 steps to the bathroom? Break it down into bite size, because you can control your body. Mm-hmm. And all of that is movement. And every time we do another little piece of movement, we create what's called behavioral momentum. So once I'm already up and moving, I am more likely to throw my pants on, or I am more likely to, walk outside and see if it's, nice out. And then I might walk to the mailbox. And so it creates this momentum, but the concept of having to get dressed and go to work, that feels huge. But each of those interim steps, I can control.
How do you initiate that when it feels so powerful, when it's such a powerful force to stay under the covers?
Depending on who you are, there are a couple different things that may be a motivating force. So why? Why should I get up and go to work? Because I want to be able to pay my bills and take care of my family, and people I love depend on me. So sometimes we need the why. On a smaller scale, sometimes we need a motivator. If I get up and go throw water on my face, I can go have, a treat from the kitchen. It's okay to kind of reward ourselves for things that are difficult. Always important to have somebody to talk to. So if you're really struggling, reach out. We absorb the energy of people around us. So if you have a support person that you can call and say, look, I just can't pull myself out of bed. And the person on the other end be like, it is gorgeous outside, stay on the phone with me. Just go into the kitchen and look outside. That energy is contagious. So try not to do it in a vacuum if you don't have to. I mean, we hear that all the time with starting a new exercise regime or starting a diet or, any life change. If you have an accountability partner, you're more likely to be successful. And I think that people really are worried about the stigma of reaching out and saying, I'm having a hard time right now. Can you help me? And again, it's that piece of role modeling. If we can truly be authentic, we can truly receive support, but we're also putting that out there into the universe. And right now we have lived very isolated lives. The more authenticity we can find, the better. So those are some of the mechanisms. There are other tricks depending on what you need to get up and do. If someone is starting a new exercise regime, they say go to bed in like shorts and a t-shirt. So you don't have to actually get dressed in the morning. Like just get out of bed.
Hack the system.
Absolutely. Alarm clock way across the room so it annoys the heck out of you. Yeah. Leave the curtains open so it's not too dark and too comfy. So a lot of those little tricks that just make us physically uncomfortable. So again, get that behavioral momentum going, but rewarding yourself. So many times we think, I should be able to get out of bed and take a shower. Well, if right now that's hard, then absolutely reward yourself for doing because it's hard right now. Maybe it's not going to be hard a month from now, but if right now it's hard, then you should act as if you just ran a marathon. Respect your accomplishments regardless of, we put that judgment on it. If it was hard for me to do, then I deserve applause.
Well, and recognize if you've started from the ground up and you've tried to, improve your diet and you've tried to move and you're still not where you want to be, then so important. Therapy is so beneficial and so helpful. I found it amazing throughout my life. It's just been, just a great place to go to get this perspective. And it's not, sometimes it's hard when you talk to the people around you, they all have their projections,
Sure.
your family and your friends and all that. But it's so great to talk to somebody who's got no skin in the game, and they can just sort of look at your situation with a trained eye, and like I said, no skin in the game, so they can really, I find it really, really helpful, super helpful.
Well, and I think there's a lot of stigma about, if I go to therapy, it means that I have a significant mental health disorder, and I'm going to be in therapy forever. And they're gonna say I have to take medication. And so therapy looks like so many different things depending on what somebody needs. There's nothing wrong to go to chat with somebody, just because right at this moment in life, I'm having a hard time adjusting to a change. And medication is appropriate for some people, but absolutely is not something that should never be, honestly, a first go-to. And, for things that are short term, realistically, I say give a therapist 4 to 6 weeks. Sometimes that's all somebody needs, but it can be very intimidating. People feel very vulnerable. I always say, give it at least 3 times.
Okay.
The first time you go and you chat with somebody, chances are they're just going to ask you a ton of questions about yourself, and you may not walk out feeling a lot better because they need all that information to start to help
Process,
So
that's a really important point.
Yeah,
and you might not always click with somebody. So if if after 3 sessions doesn't feel like it's clicking, then don't be afraid to keep reaching out. I suppose you got to look out if you're going through 4, 5, and 6, then maybe it's not the therapist.
And often that means that maybe I'm just not quite ready to address whatever this difficulty is. And a lot of times you have to find out what a core issue is. A lot of folks come to chat because of a surface issue. And then as you keep talking, there are similar surface issues that have the same core. So let's address that core. And then all of those coping mechanisms get better, and you can handle anything that comes down the pike. Sometimes people don't necessarily, want to look that deep. And I honestly don't think people need to linger in the past for a long time. But similar when we're talking about how do I give someone else their space, respecting that people have had their journey. And if you're going to do some of your own self-healing or growing, people need to be aware of what were some of those steps in those journey, and maybe where did something creep in there that didn't give you the right cognitive framework to get through the current scenario. So let's just change that cognitive framework. So kind of knowing where that started from. But there isn't any need to necessarily linger there unless it's a specific trauma or something that really needs to be processed more fully. But that's usually the exception.
So in the mental health field, is Mental Health Awareness Month like you guys are in it all the time? So is it any blip for you? It's not like you're going to celebrate. There's no office parties.
No.
You're in it seven days a week, 365 days a year. So
no.
Every month is Mental Health Awareness Month for you.
I think that's pretty true. I do think it's great that people will start talking about it more. And the more that we talk about it, it does lessen that stigma, especially for folks who are really struggling, who might have some suicidal ideation. So I think over time, and the more that, there's mental health awareness events, songs, we've had some great music come out. It does start to lessen that stigma, which hopefully makes more fertile ground for folks getting help.
Well, one of the good things about everything being out on the internet is you start to realize people tend to be very cards on the table with what they've been through and talk about it and be like, oh yeah, I do therapy. And then all of a sudden you go, wow, that person's in therapy, and that person's in therapy, and that person's done therapy. And then it's like, oh, okay. So this is a lot more widespread than people realize. Whereas, 50 years ago, not discussed.
And this concept where so many people are now doing telehealth because they couldn't travel, I don't think that's going to lessen. I have some folks I talk to that actually currently are in different states. We'll continue to do this telehealth, and it works. To me, it's not an ideal, but it has allowed us to cross lines. The one thing I will say when you talk about so much information being out on the internet, and there is a lot of great information out there, but I do caution folks, if you get into some of these blogs or chat rooms about particular mental health issues, please be aware if the person that you're talking to or that you're reading about, do they have any mental health background? It's great to hear other people's experiences, but just to be cautious because, you can get some information that isn't necessarily beneficial. So just take it in, but make sure you're actually talking to a mental health professional. Usually you can tell if something doesn't just sit right, but just be aware that that is one of the dangers about things being more widespread on the internet.
Yeah. Yeah. People put stuff out there that you're like, "Ooh, wait a minute."
Yeah. Yep. Or they're still processing their own stuff.
Yeah.
And unfortunately we can get caught up into that. And a lot of them will do some venting, which has an appropriate place, but lingering in the venting is just going to cement that negativity. And there are certainly some chat rooms and some blogs that just create a place of commiseration, but not a place of growth.
Yeah.
So just be careful of where you linger and why you're searching for what you're searching, and making sure that there's some support and backup that's kind of official.
So what do you see on the horizon?
That's a big question.
I know.
In regards to,
well, just like where we're going, like you made a really good point about how different types of people are who maybe didn't have issues at the beginning of the pandemic are going to have issues now. And it's hard to know where we're going to be even in three months,
I think we've learned that people are incredibly strong and resilient. But I think that we're going to face, in the mental health world, we're going to face a year with some really significant challenges with some people that are really struggling. I forget the exact statistic, but the number of young people who lost both parents during this time, so what they're going to need to process. And again, that kind of delayed impact of having led this quarantine sort of existence. I think we're going to see some real stressors caused by finances. We've had some great stimulus checks from the government, but that's not forever. And so that creates kind of a different mentality. I'm connected to some school systems, and across the United States, we have kids who have continued to be remote for the past 15 months. They have not been in a school setting. So seeing where this has impacted kiddos of different developmental ages, we haven't even begun to see that. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's still so much that is going to be unraveled and need to be dealt with, because it is such an unprecedented scenario. Mm-hmm. So as much as I think there's reasons to celebrate, I think those should be very cautious, and we should continue to stay in touch with each other of what those around us are feeling, be aware of what we're feeling, and continue to give that grace, because the mental health impact is far from over. And
yeah, I think so. I definitely agree. Well, thank you so much for this. I love anytime I was talking with you. It's a treat. So
thank you for having me. And I hope everybody stays well and seeks the support they need.
Yeah, I do too. I think it's more, hopefully will be more available. Let's hope that as we move forward, it'll continue to be talked about, and the opportunity and the availability of access will be there for people, because it's so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
All right.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.